How's it going? Back in historic Fredericksburg, and I'm going to be doing a walk down historic Hanover Street, and it's one of the first original 8 streets that were chartered out in the city. And yeah, a lot of prominent figures lived here, a lot of doctors, lawyers, politicians. And I'll be walking down the 500, 400, 300 blocks down to Princess Anne Street. And yeah, I'm headed north. Rappahannock River is about 5 blocks down. So right now I'm on Federal Hill, and this house is called Federal Hill. And one of the first houses built in the area, built in the early 1790s by a guy named Robert Brooke. And he was Virginia governor 1794, 1796. And yeah, there's supposed to be a couple dependencies. You can't see it from here, but looks like there's a smokehouse on the other side of that fence. And this house was actually built before the road was constructed. That's why it's kind of at a funny angle. I'll also tell you that his sister lived here, and she was married to Fontaine Maury from the big Maury family here in Fredericksburg. He was Fredericksburg mayor 1793, and the old Maury School is down there kind of at the end of Hanover on the right. Oh, and to also let you know that that Brooks named this Federal Hill because he was a member of the Federalist Party. Yeah, so anyway, Thomas Reed Roots then lived here, and a little story with him. He's the grandfather of General Thomas Cobb, for anyone who knows their Battle of Fredericksburg Civil War history. And he's a general that died defending sunken. And yeah, the story goes the cannonball that was fired that ended up killing him was fired from this hill, which is kind of ironic because he used to play here with his grandfather when he was a kid. And then one last thing, a guy in the 1960s, Dr. Lanier, helped fund the statue for the Angel of Marie's Heights, which is for Richard Kirkland. He was a Civil War soldier who, after the Battle of Fredericksburg, they pretty much mowed down the Union troops, he jumped over the fence and gave them water and kind of gave them aid. So yeah, that's the story on Federal Hill. And real quick, I'll tell you, a lady, Miss Fleming, lived here, and her daughters are responsible for they created the foundation to help restore Kenmore. And right here, this house was originally a kitchen to this much larger house, and this was built by John Taylor Lomax, and part of the big Taylor family from down in Mount Airy and Menokin. I talk a lot about him. I did a video on Menokin a couple months ago. And yeah, so just to recap, he was friends with Thomas Jefferson. He became the first law professor at UVA. He's buried over in the Fredericksburg Cemetery. And then let's see, after him, and then Judge Embry lived here, and he's the one that the Embry Dam was named after. Embry Dam, it was kind of a little downstream of the Interstate 95 bridge. So I'll walk over here, and this is the old Trinity Church. Pretty cool architecture, and I'm sure it was an eyesore for whoever was living there at the time. But this house was built in the late 1880s. Story goes with this house, the preacher, the Reverend, over at St. George's, he had a falling out with some of the congregation, so he and some of the congregation came over here, formed this church. In the 1950s, the church moved over off College Avenue, and then so this became a Pentecostal church. So little story with that. And yeah, so coming up on Prince Edward. And real quick, I'll just take a quick detour because there's an order home down here. And then I'll give you a little bit of history. Like I said, I did a deep dive into this area. So I can tell you Fredericksburg was first patented to the settlers in 1671 to a guy, John Buckner, and a guy, his last name is Royster. And John Buckner, I did a video on Port Royal, and he was responsible. He commissioned the building of the first tobacco warehouse there in Port Royal, so he helped get Port Royal off the ground as well. So, all right, real quick, I'll just point this house out. And it says 1926, this is the Pratt House. Don't know too much about the house, but I can tell you that Pratt's another big family in the area. Anybody from around here would be familiar with Pratt Park. He donated the land for the park. He also helped restore, responsible for the restoration. And he also lived at that Smithfield plantation, the same place where Robert Brooke was born. So yeah, Pratts have a lot of history in the area. And right here, I'll just continue with my Fredericksburg history. So like I say, the Royster and the John Buckner first patented the land, and this part of Fredericksburg was owned by John Buckner. So John Buckner ended up passing on to a guy, Henry Willis. And you might be familiar with Willis Hill. It's where the Fredericksburg National Cemetery is, over there behind Sunken Road. Let's see, he also owned Thornton's Tavern, which is the oldest building in the city. And it's called Thornton's Tavern because the Thorntons managed it, but he actually owned it. And yeah, so after it fell out of the hands of the Willises, it was bought by a guy named John Allen, who he was a land developer early 1700s, and he called this area Allentown, and it was just north of Fredericksburg's. I believe Fredericksburg ended right at Charles Street. And I'm pausing here because according to the maps I've looked at, this kind of area is where the road went for the little Allentown. It was kind of a little small development. So, all right, after Allentown, it fell into the hands of a guy, Charles Yates, and a prominent businessman in the area. He owns a lot of Hanover Street, kind of going down toward Princess Anne, kind of the 300 to 400 block, just right up here. And let's see, I'll get to more on him in a little while. But so after he owned it, it fell into the hands of the Thomas Reed Roots, like I had mentioned, over at Federal Hill, and he had actually hired John Gorick, big Gorick family, Gorick Pharmacy, down there, and he's the one who kind of gritted it out and made it to what it looks like today. And that was the early 1800s, 1820s, 30s, and 40s. These houses started to pop up. So, all right, so 400 block, not too exciting a story, but the lady who lived here named Miss Young, during the Civil War, Fredericksburg was occupied by Union troops, and little story I heard is she let Union troops go in the back to wash their hands, get water, and she had 7 daughters, and she would kind of keep them upstairs when they would arrive. So over here they call this the Mission House, and it was the home of Reverend John Cobbler, and he's the one who built the Methodist Church. I'll get to down there. So he was from Culpeper, and this thing was built 1821. Yeah, the missionary house. So he lived here, and just a few years later he donated this building to the church and moved into this house, which was built 1826. So, and then eventually at the 1850s, after he had passed away, this was donated to the church as well. And I'm sure a lot of these houses have kind of been rebuilt, but and this one was built by Eustace Conway, and there's like a little ghost in the window, and he was the uncle of Moncure Conway. He was an abolitionist that lived over in Falmouth, there off River Road. Yeah, in Moncure, he's pretty famous. He was a writer. He wrote a biography on Nathaniel Hawthorne. He also kind of was part of the Underground Railroad. He brought about 30 of his family slaves. He took them out to Ohio, a little town outside of Dayton, and just kind of formed a little town, I guess. So this, yeah, built 1851. All right, and then so after the Conways, Montgomery Slaughter, he was the mayor of Fredericksburg during the Civil War. He lived here. And then around 1900, a guy named George Fitzhugh lived here, and if you watch any of my videos, I'm always talking about the Fitzhughs. They owned a lot of land in the Northern Neck area, and they're the ones who built Chatham Manor, William Fitzhugh. And oh yeah, so anyway, so he held a reception for President William McKinley 1900, because McKinley had come down here as part of a celebration for the Army of the Potomac Union soldiers, and they celebrated down at the town hall, which is now the Fredericksburg Area Museum. So yeah, that's kind of neat. And I guess I'll kind of walk up 400 block, and not too much history on this house. It's kind of newer, built 1900, but yeah, just pretty cool architecture, and yeah, very well kept. So pretty neat looking house. and not too much history on this one. This was a kind of newer, built 1888 by a guy, George Tuning, and they say this is built in French imperial style architecture. So yeah, kind of interesting. And I'll move on to this one. This one's got a lot of history. This house was built by Dr. Richard Carmichael, and he's part of the Carmichael family. I'll get to it, but the end of the 300 block, James Carmichael had built that house. 4 generations of doctors, Carmichael doctors, lived there. 5 doctors altogether. And yeah, so he lived here. In a little piece of history, Vice President Day Stevenson stayed here. He had come down with President Grover Cleveland for the dedication of the Mary Washington Monument, and that would be 1894. So coming up on another kind of big one, I guess. And J.G. John Herkamp lived here, and yeah, in Herkamp Park, it's kind of like the little city park a couple blocks over, named after him. And it was named after him because he donated the wrought iron fence that used to surround it. I guess, yeah, you'll see the fence here. And he owned a foundry here in Fredericksburg, also owned a tannery. He was a German immigrant. And it was built 1848, and he moved in, yeah, 1848. And he moved in 1862, so a little after the start of the Civil War. And a little story with this house is that during the Civil War, as I had said, area was occupied by Union troops, and this was made the headquarters by Union General John Sedgwick. And John Sedgwick, Herkamp was really hospitable despite the circumstances, and they kind of sort of became friends. So after Sedgwick had left, Sedgwick wrote Herkamp a letter kind of thanking him for his hospitality, and he told him one day he would like to return the favor. So fast forward about 8-9 months later, 56 Fredericksburg residents were rounded up, taken prisoner, taken up to Fort Delaware, and they were taken prisoner in retaliation to some Union troops that were arrested after the Battle of Fredericksburg, some stragglers. And yeah, so the story goes that Herkamp had showed the officer the letter that Sedgwick had written him, and then Abraham Lincoln gave him a pardon, and he got to come home. The remaining prisoners were there for about 2 more months. And let's see, this one, 1848, same year. All right, and yeah, this house was abandoned. It looks like they're connected now, but it was abandoned during the Civil War. I always like to see these little step-ups and the little horse ties. And at one time there was a cannonball lodged in the side for a while, and then it was said in 1867 the Green family moved in, and they lived in the house up until the writing of the documentation I had read, which was around 2000. So they lived there all that time. All right, head down to the 300 block. And oh yeah, as I had said, the Dr. James Carmichael built this early 1800s. As I said, 4 generations, 5 doctors lived here. And yeah, pretty cool dual chimneys there on the side. And up here you've got the little boot scrapers, you got an old mailbox. And this little building here was kind of the medicine shop, kind of little medical practice was held in here. So, and here's another older house going back to the 1700s, 1780s. It was built by that Charles Yates, that businessman, and he owned, like I said, he kind of owned this kind of strip. And well, I'll get to it in a minute, but. Yeah, so it was built 1780. All right, so this other duplex was built early 1800s, the right side, and at one time it was called the Ivy Motor Inn. So, and Princess Anne was a pretty big, I think it was actually Route 1 originally, going way back, thoroughfare. So, And since I'm on Princess Anne real quick, I've done a video on the Masonic Lodge, but yeah, it was built 1816. And the Masonic Lodge in Fredericksburg, going back to the 1700s, one of the oldest in the country. And the original Masonic Lodges were over by the Hugh Mercer Apothecary. They bounced around from a couple taverns. But yeah, George Washington, James Monroe, Robert Brooke, all members. And I'll also throw out, since I'm here, not much going on Charlotte Street, just a block. Oh, sorry. Real quick, I'll also tell you the City Hall right there was built in 1910. It was originally the post office. And then post office has now moved to the right side of the road, a block down off Charlotte Street. And I'll tell you real quick, off Charlotte Street was the home of Matthew Morey, a big Fredericksburg citizen. And that was his primary residence. Unfortunately, the house was, I don't know if it was burned down or demolished, I believe in the 1950s. But if you walk up Charlotte in front of the post office, they have a little plaque on there as a memorial. Yeah, so anyway, so this empty lot here at one time was called the Forbes House. It was the home of the Charles Yates, who I keep mentioning. And from what I understand, I know that Charles Street gets cut off. It doesn't cross there because it sounds like his estate kind of stretched back a little ways, and it kind of, yeah, blocked Charles Street from going over. So he owned a whole lot of this land. And eventually in the church, I believe 1961, they got rid of the house. So, and yeah, we're coming up on the big Methodist church here. And it was built at the early 1840s. Like I say, started up by that Reverend John Cobbler. And he died just a couple years after it was built. And he was actually buried under the pulpit. And the original church, I don't know if it burned down, but anyway, it was rebuilt 1880s. And a little story with this church is that 1848, so just a few years after it was built, there was a split between the Southern Methodist and the Northern Methodist. Southern Methodists were pro-slavery, Northern, you know, they were kind of abolitionists. And so the Southern Methodists had left, and they eventually built a church off George Street. And then shortly after the Civil War, yeah, they joined back up. So, and then I can tell you also, I'd read that this church was the first Methodist church to have black people in their congregation, and I think that wasn't until the 1960s. So yeah, it's got a pretty cool, like, Gothic look to it. Yeah, and there's a big bell in there, so feels good in the shade. All right, I guess I'm about almost done here. Fredericksburg Methodist Church, yeah, it was rebuilt. This one was 1882. Yeah, in this building, which is now part of the church. But, and I could tell you before it was, that in the 1890s, Cecilia Gorick lived here. And I'll say it again, part of the big Gorick family. They've got that pharmacy down there off Caroline Street. So, all right, I guess, I'll just walk over to this house just to throw it out there, because it's kind of just randomly sticking out. And it was originally off George Street. They moved it over here when they built the bank. Kind of interesting architecture. See St. George's steeple, St. George's Church. And so 1866. And it's built for Elizabeth Ann Thornton Fitzgerald. And all I can tell you about this is that Thornton, that's another big name here in Fredericksburg. Like I had mentioned, you've got Thornton's Tavern down there. You had Thornton Mill, which was pretty much the first mill built along the Rappahannock. And the Thorntons, going back to the 1600s, they're the one who patented the land just west of here. If you cross Route 1, go to the Fall Hill area, that was theirs originally, and they owned that land for several generations. Like I say, it was the early 1700s they opened that mill, and then they managed, like I say, that Thornton's Tavern. So, all right, I think I knocked it all out, so pretty cool. Anyway, all right, I'll see you on the next one.